Hello, my name is Nathalie Anguezomo Mba Bikoro, and I am a visual artist and curator, and I'm going to share a little bit with you some of my work processes. So in my work, it's really important that I don't reenact or embody histories per se, but think about different ways of thinking about the functionality of technologies and queering narratives. So I'm often engaging in the archive of the missing or what is considered unlegitimized within cultural archives, and think about processes of intimacy and storytelling by engaging the public and the communities within common tasks together in order to dig further into stories and narratives that haven't been told before. What for me is really important in my work is thinking about practices of solidarity and healing, and doing things together. And that has to do a lot with coming into acknowledging certain ruinations of colonial traditions and how they affected systematically different geographical spaces and communities, and how does it relate to our migrational journeys. I'm very much interested to think about narratives and scripts in former filmmaking during the First and Second War, especially from the Weimar Republic and in German colonial cinema, because a lot of these scripts were either written by former German feminists, or they were also edited and renditioned by black feminists who worked in the theaters. And for me, they always bring new ideas and new messages about the way that, in that sense, we embody histories and which memories we choose to narrate. I think in terms of discourse, I try to think of it as a kind of intersectional practice, where thinking about resonances of archives and sonic disobediences, thinking about restitutions of memories and the fiction of traditions, through exploring a sort of biomythography of my own story, of my own family, and its relation to different places in the West and also on the African continent and in Brazil. I think for me, it's about the danger of monoculture narratives. So believing for what is already there, what is the given, and not having the ability or having to ask for permission for a kind of imagination in order for things to free our imaginations in a way would be to, discuss the fragility of white narratives and white supremacies, and thinking about these systems of power and oppression, and seeing why and how can the moment of fiction and restitution through performative healing can then dismantle maybe some of these more rigid traditions of the Western canon, which is often just either a way to tokenize, exoticize, or reuse a certain vocabulary for the profit of research, science, and museums. I don't really believe in geographic fluidity, especially when it doesn't recognize the whole system of privilege. I mean, especially when we're thinking about artistic practice within this ideology of geographic fluidity, I mean, this doesn't come without privilege, and it doesn't come without the danger of art tourism or tokenizing on other people, and always the danger of othering people that you consider different as you, and where you are inevitably going to profit from it, from exploiting these narratives that are not your own and that you cannot understand. I think in order to have a connection with people, you have to have a commitment on a long-term basis. You have to acknowledge your role as the guest and who is hosting you, and perhaps even, be critical of yourself and find yourself in that space and consider what is your own story in the space where you're moving into, rather than profiting or exploring or discovering something that you consider other than you. The idea is when you are, you know, going to different places, is that it's going to create a trigger to have to deal with power, oppression, inequality, and whiteness. Creating these kind of relationships with people is that there must be a moment where you have to fall apart, you have to break apart in order to even consider if your practice in the end would become a kind of allyship or solidarity of some sorts without disempowering the community. I think I really don't believe in the practice or even, the idea of a universal knowledge, because you have to consider the set of privilege and conditions of the environment that you are in. And also it reflects exactly on the power that you exert and the privilege that you hold in this kind of fluidity in spaces, and talking with people. So I think we have to be quite critical in thinking about situating knowledge, because knowledge is also based on a power dynamic. It's based on the voice of the privileged, um, and the voice of the privileged is always based on what they consider the world should look like under their own expectations, in order to assert a kind of hierarchy over others. Well, I think the biggest impact that you can have when working with communities, is that you shouldn't take for granted the work that's already been there. And I think it's really important to observe and acknowledge those that have been doing the work for centuries before you and who have lost their lives. And you come in as an intruder, maybe, in order to exploit those stories for, you know, for a very small audience somewhere else. And I think for me, it doesn't make sense. I think it is about having a relationship and finding connections in terms of experiences, common experiences, and finding, their voices within the questions that you want to ask, and also be very open to criticism, and acknowledge maybe the faults of what you do or what you think, and not necessarily think that, coming up with an idea um, gives you the entitlement to decide who's going to narrate the story. I think for me, when you work with community and you think about solidifying allyship, is to make sure that you empower other people. You don't disempower them by feeling an entitlement that you might feel empowers you, if in the end it disempowers them, then nothing can happen, I think. And I think this has very much to do with a sort of imagination and vulnerability, opening up to situations and letting go of most bias that we may hold consciously or unconsciously. But always the voices and experiences of the people there should be amplified and should be accompanied rather than exploited for one's own ideology or one's own vision. Well, I always challenge my audience. I mean, after 17 years of doing performance work in open spaces and in different contexts in different countries, it can be, especially as a person of color, it can be very dangerous, because a lot of the work that you're going to present, especially within institutions, are going to be all white spaces. And they've always been male-dominated, patriarchal, extremely sexually violent, where you may experience assault, dismissal, racism, and it's never improved. Even if you are in the space of women who are leading these institutions now more than before, and again pushing forward these practices of feminism, but always excludes you and always exploits you. So you never feel that you can arrive into a safer space to show your work. So actually, the way that my work has been received was that I always challenged the institutions. I think there was always an expectation, according to how you look like, how you sound like, where you come from, about what kind of definitions they should put on you, especially in performance work. And I think for me to challenge certain conceptions and ideas and racist behaviors is to challenge that in the work, in the practice. And that means I'm never alone doing it. I find my community, people, networks to support and understand who you are as a person. And in order to, weaken the institution and ask questions about what they are already doing, and it's not by using or following trendy discourses and vocabulary that all of a sudden you become anti-racist or intersectional or feminist. It's not true, because it's not there in the practice when artist works are being curated. And in terms of bringing, communities together, I learn a lot from people. I never impose an idea on other people. I make sure that this is a community effort, and that I don't impose my authorship on it, that I make sure that their voices and visibility is at the forefront before me. And I ask questions within it, a set of questions in terms of what is it that we know and we don't know, and in order to make people feel uncomfortable in those spaces. And but then it allows also a space of empowerment for exactly the people who are never allowed in these kind of spaces, and also for me as a practitioner to reclaim my body, so it's not exotified or discovered or exploited, but it's my own, and I reclaim it, and I set a fire in that sense. Also, the danger with collaboration is also to think about who is leading the practice or the circle of collaboration and who is triggering it, because I think in essence, collaboration also means that it's going to show you the spaces of inequality and who is entitled to take your story and to narrate it, rather than empowering you to become independent and to reclaim that space of the body for yourself. So collaboration also should be not just thought about, who holds the privilege and entitlement, but thinking about ways maybe as collaboration where there is no profit from it, because collaboration, since it's within a community, it's about survival. And if you're not interested in the survival of people who are dying and who are struggling in order to give your existence a comfortable means, and you are exploiting that in very little relation to their own struggles and joys for your own profitability somewhere else, then the impossibility of collaboration is it's very fragile. I think also collaboration is about failure, because since it's a relationship that you have to forge that is also honest, it has to be transparent, and it can take a lot of time. It can take many years. But I think if we envision collaboration as a set of rules and a trajectory or goal, sometimes it can fail because we have certain expectations of ourselves or the people around us to work with us. And certain situations and conditions does not allow for these networks or these collaborations to happen, and often it can create different kinds of networks and relationships through failure. Sometimes it doesn't work because we force these relationships to happen for our own profit. It will always be on the profitability of the individual, unfortunately, because of whether you're coming from financial pressure or for visibility or for acknowledgement from institutions. But I find that collaboration works with commitment, with time, with softness, with extreme transparency, and also be open to changes as well, and not to have too much control about the process of how the work will come about. I think the most important political dimension in my practice is about the story of struggle and joy. I think especially with live art performance work, since it's something that it's not reenacting, but it's performing the archives of living memory. It's about pain, it's about failure, it's about tragedy, it's about illness, it's also about joy, it's laughter, it's about love, and it's about intimacy. And I think for me, the politicality is about the poetry within the intimacy that I have with people. I think there's a false obsession about the practice of curating and collecting these memories, and archiving and presenting performance work, because at the end of the day, even in the digital age, a lot of the works that we create will be lost, even in digital clouds, or however it disappears. And I think for me, what people remember is the connectivity or the legacy of the moment they have shared this work with you. I think for me, a documentation can fail to do that often because we're talking about a dimension of emotion and softness that documentation nonetheless can dismiss. And I think the digital dimension is not a reliable source for connectivity in that sense, especially in performance. But I think that the transmission is about the conversation that we have between ourselves and to take care of each other's force. How do we remember moments like this and legacies in performances? that cannot be saved in documentation or that are not documented. I think, returning to these moments in a different way with different groups of people, whether it would be through walks, conversations with the community, gatherings, hospitality, accounting to certain events and to each other, committing to the work of communities is also a way of archiving. It's just to push on the legacy also, rather than to restrict ourselves to this idea or this practice of institutional archive. And so who is the narrator? Who is the documenter? Who is the archiver? Who is the curator of these objects?